everybody. My name is Serge Droz, and I'm a senior advisor at the Swiss Department of Foreign Affairs, and I'm also on the board of the Forum of Incident Response and Security Teams. My background in the past 20 years has been cybersecurity, where I was mostly busy kind of chasing cyber criminals, but I've increasingly come in touch with topics surrounding privacy and protecting internet users from various attackers. So today I'd like to talk about safety and privacy. Are these two things that contradict each other, or are these the same thing? What is this about? We talk a lot about these type of things. So let me take you on a journey into kind of the depths of cybercrime and see what safety and privacy have to do with each other. There's a fairly old movie, it's nearly 20 years, oh, it's over 20 years old, Enemy of the State, where this was already a topic. Will Smith in this movie is kind of caught up in a surveillance scandal and is talking to his boss, who kind of starts questioning his motives and things like that. And at the end of the day, and this costs him his job, he says, well, none of my fucking business. You're damn right, it's not. So already there we have this kind of thing about what is privacy and why is it important and things like this. So that's where we start. Often people say, oh, most of the internet users, they don't care about privacy. They're not really interested. They post everything on social media. Actually, if you ask people, that's not true. It's actually quite wrong. This is admittedly a fairly old survey by the Pew Research Institute, but it's still kind of valid today. When you ask people how important it is that they control what the information is collected about them, most of these people say, well, it's actually very important. As is not being watched by others, as is the ability to communicate in privacy, to be in control of the information that is about you. This can be just what you say to your neighbor, even if it's something seemingly trivial, but you're going to go and cook for breakfast, as well as medical history, whatnot. However, and here's the crux, most people actually believe there are surveilled. There's nothing they can do about this. And this is kind of actually a sad thing. So most people feel, hey, privacy is really very, very important to me. But I don't believe I really have privacy. And there's nothing I can really do. What I also find interesting is if you start looking at the details, is that states and private companies really fare the same. Often you have the impression that people feel the states is monitoring and watching them, whereas they're very kind of naive when it comes to tech industry monitoring them. Well, that's not what surveys suggest. The surveys suggest that consumers, internet users, know very well or have a very strong feeling about who is watching them and who not. So states, of course, start realizing the importance of privacy. And in Europe, for example, we have the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, which is considered as one of the strongest privacy laws, with the aim of protecting citizens' privacy. However, these laws don't always seem to work. A couple of years ago, there was an interview with a ransomware operator. And remember, ransomware operators, they encrypt your information, but before they do so, they actually steal your information. The business case is not so much that you don't have access to your information anymore. The business case of ransomware operators is that they're going to threaten to sell your information if you don't pay the ransom. Just on a side note, they're going to sell it anyways, so never pay a ransom. But this one ransomware operator, which was so bold to give an interview, when asked about who is actually paying, gave the following, I think, very interesting, but also a bit depressing answer. He said, well, one of the actors, a lot of the Europeans are paying because they're afraid to get a fine by the regulator because their information was stolen. So here we have one of the strongest privacy laws on the planet. And what does it do? It fuels ransomware. there is something inherently wrong. This just doesn't feel right. To me, it doesn't feel right. And of course, the big problem here is that this is about criminals who don't have any honor. And so you can say, okay, this is ransomware nowadays. It affects mostly companies. It's not about us, simple citizens. Yes, if our healthcare system is affected, then we lose information, but it's not about our personal data. Well, nothing could be further from the truth. If you look at the FBI reports or the Federal Trade Commission's reports on Roman scams, you see it's one of the biggest crimes in terms of people making money. What are Roman scams? Roman scams is you get to meet someone on the internet who kind of is very close. It's a soulmate. It's a person that builds up a relationship, a very emotional relationship. A lot of people, especially people that are lonely, kind of fall for these type of things. Sooner or later, there's the question coming, hey, I'm in financial troubles. Can you help me out? And what you see here is not only the number of victims has gone up, and that's partly due to COVID, but only partly, but also the losses in $1,000,000. Last year, it's been nearly kind of $60,000 million in the US alone that were lost to cyber criminals. It's not only the money that counts here, it's also the emotional damage that these people do. These are people you trusted. These are people that you probably kind of told your biggest secrets, because that's what Roman scams do. They abuse this. So I think one of the biggest threats, it should be clear by now, is coming from cybercrime. One of the biggest threats to its privacy is coming from cybercrime. And if you actually look at the headlines, I think this is confirmed. What we see here is hackers targeting hotel chains, stealing all the information hotels store about you. It's not just some kind of cheap outlet somewhere that doesn't have any technical expertise. It's big chains that get targeted. Online dating sites, health information, pretty much everything is going to be stolen. Hackers don't have any honor. They steal this information. There was this case a couple of years ago where the psychological hospital was compromised. All the data was stolen, and instead of going to the hospital, they went to the relatives of the patients and say, hey, if you don't pay us money, we're going to make it public that you have a relative in a psychiatric ward. That is horrible, and that is what is a reality today. Now, the private sector has been for a very, very long time about this. And what the private sector does, and the security teams around the world, and these security teams are the ones that are members of FIRST, the Forum of Incident Response and Security Teams, is to exchange information that allow us to identify criminals and protect our users from criminals. What you see here is just kind of a tiny little thing, a tiny little excerpt from log files. These are all kind of requests to web server that should not exist because the web server is not publicly known. These are criminals mostly trying to figure out if there is a way in. What we do is we exchange this information to make sure we kind of get an idea of where the criminals are hiding, what they're doing. There's no personal information in here. Recently in the press, there's been quite a bit of noise about security organizations sharing and selling the data about users. Well, this is really not true. We do is sharing information that helps us protect users against cyber criminals and sometimes nation state actors. But this is kind of a whack-a-mole game. We are always kind of behind. We are always reacting to someone trying to do something. We're reacting to a breach. We're trying to kind of stop attackers that have already stolen data. And while I wouldn't go as far as saying we're losing the fight, it doesn't seem to be very, very efficient. Today, if you read the newspapers, every day pretty much you read about data being stolen, about personal data being stolen. So clearly, this is not good. The best thing would be to put people behind bars. But that seems to be really hard. The person you see on this slide, Eugenie Bogachev is one of the most wanted cyber criminals. He has a mansion at the Black Sea, he's protected, living in Russia. Apparently, he pays off enough police officers so he doesn't get bothered. But he's responsible for millions of stolen records about personal data, banking data. We don't seem to be able to catch these people. And that, of course, is a problem, because the best way to end all of this is to put these criminals behind bars. There's often talk about, when law enforcement comes out, about protecting children, about protecting against terrorists. These are all things that are important, but it's not only that. It really is about criminals that go after you. They go after you just every day because they don't really care who you are. Why is it so hard? Well, I guess all know cybercrime is transnational. It's very, very fast. So the log files I showed you earlier on was just a few hours of data, and they come from all over the world. So cybercrime is something that's really a global phenomenon. Cyber criminals that run attacks in their own home countries are the dumb ones. They end up sooner or later behind bars. But cyber criminals that are kind of just a little smart have a very, very low kind of risk of going to jail. I think it's probably much more likely you go to jail if you steal a slice of pizza rather than hack a bank or hack a hospital. And that is really not what you should be doing. So we seem to have a problem, and especially law enforcement seems to have a problem. The solution that law enforcement usually comes up with, or quite often comes up with, is, well, let's break encryption. Encryption is what protects our communications. When I go to a website, the content typically is encrypted. When we talk on Signal, it's so encrypted that no one can really intercept this. And that's a good thing, because it protects our privacy and our conversations, our private conversations, our not so private conversations from prying eyes. Law enforcement always comes with the solution, oh, let's break this up so we're going to catch the bad guys. But that's too short-sighted. I don't think that is going to be the solution, because security people find criminals. We see them. We see them without actually breaking up encryption. So this information is around, but it's not really used. Why is this the case? Well, because there's really no way security companies work kind of in a systematic way with law enforcement. Some do more, others don't at all. And I think a big part is also coming from privacy advocates. And privacy advocates are faced with the question, what should we do to fight cybercrime, or should we start breaking encryption? The answer is always no. Yes, I totally agree. We should not break end-to-end encryption. But there got to be more. We need to start working together. We need to come up with solutions that allow us to catch the bad guys, that allow us to fight abuse on the internet. I do realize this is not a popular opinion to say in a conference about privacy, about ethical data handling and things like this, but we need to do more than just say no. And I've been in conversations with privacy advocates where really the only thing I could get out is be against everything, but that's not going to lead to any solutions. There is the Universal Declaration of the Human Rights. Privacy is not something that just comes out of a vacuum that a few extremists say, hey, it's really important. It's actually one of the basic rights you enjoy as a citizen on this planet. Pretty much every nation on the planet has signed the Universal Declaration of the Human Rights. And one of the things in Article 12 that it says is that you have the right to privacy. You have the right to be protected against arbitrary interference of your private life. But also in Article 3, it says everyone has the right to life, liberty, and security of the person. So you equally have the right not to become a victim of rumor and scam. You have equally the right of your health data not being stolen. And these two things, when the declaration was written, were they could live beside each other quite well. The internet has really kind of changed this because it's so much more information. It goes through so many more hands than it used to. In the olden days, we had normal, ordinary paper mail. Paper mail is protected by the postal secret, so states are not allowed to open up envelopes. And that's something that's been more or less protected. But paper mail was collected by a postman. It was not collected by an internet service provider, handed over to someone you don't really know, and passed on and on and on around the globe. So that makes it harder. But at the bottom of all of this is a dilemma. It's the dilemma that security is not something you just automatically get, and security is improved by actually monitoring what people are doing. That's why it's important that the police drives through the streets, versus privacy, who is really about no one looking there. And that's why the police doesn't enter homes. At least it shouldn't enter homes. How do we solve this dilemma on the internet? It's a good question. I would argue that the first step to solving this problem, and I'm kind of spoiler alert here, I don't have the solution to it, but I would say the first step would be to acknowledge each other's problem. So that means that privacy advocates, such as myself, really need to acknowledge that we have a problem with cybercrime, that we have criminals that don't give a damn about your rights, that just are interested in their own benefits. And this is a problem. And it's not only a problem with little kids or terrorists, it's a problem for all of us. It's our money that gets stolen, it's our health data that gets stolen, it's whatever gets stolen. This is a big problem. On the other side, I think law enforcement agencies really need to respect the need for privacy. They need to respect that people don't want to be kind of the citizens of glass, that they don't want to have everything looked at, that we don't want to have police officers entering our virtual habitats. And I think once we have this common understanding and acknowledgement of each other's challenges, then we can start finding solutions. There's a term that I call privacy-preserving abuse fighting. This comes from a time where I was working at an email company where we were faced with tons of abuse. And there is different ways to fight abuse without actually snooping on people. A better way would probably be to call this ethical abuse fighting. But whatever terms you use, I think we need to come to better understandings on how we can fight abuse and arrest criminals and protect at the same time the privacy of our users. Obviously, one thing is leveraging metadata. Metadata has always been around. It's the data that surrounds the actual communication. So in the paper mail world, it's the address and the sender address. In the electronic world, there's a lot more metadata. There is what IP address it's coming from, what computer system it's coming from, and so on. There's, depending on whatever you send around, there's lots of metadata that can actually be looked at without revealing anything about the content. And tech companies do this because if they weren't to do this, your mailboxes would be overflowing with spam. And most of the internet probably today would be unusable. Authorities know that metadata is very powerful. General Hayden, a former head of NSA, once said, "We kill based on metadata." I hope we don't have to go that far, but metadata is something very, very powerful that we can leverage. Obviously, what we don't want to have is that authorities just come in and get endless access to all of these things. So the next thing that I feel is very, very important in having kind of an ethical abuse fighting regime is that we have some form of oversight. This could be an industry-wide oversight board that looks at how do organizations do abuse fighting. At that email company, we had an internal body that actually consulted about each new method of finding abuse, where we were thinking about, does this make sense? Is this really in the interest of our users? Do we violate any laws? But this has to be overseen. You can't just blindly trust technology. Engineers tend to say technology is neutral. Well, I'm sad to say I don't feel this is true. I feel Technology is probably not bad, it's probably not good, but it certainly isn't neutral. It all depends on how you use it and what you do with it. Um, and then last but not least, this is a global problem. So the law enforcement system we have today works very, very slowly in international collaboration. And I think that's so by design, by intention, and I'm not sure we need to change this. But what we need to have is that we need to have informal ways where people can get together and try to figure out how can we combat abuse. Is how do we find the bad guys that steal our users' information? And informal doesn't mean you just don't care about rules. I think the rules are very, very important because at the end of the day, if you arrest criminals, you want to put them into prison. And I'd rather see very strong rules on this happening. But it's about starting to understand how the other partners in this work, how do they operate? What's important for them? Remember when I said one of the important things is to acknowledge each other's problems? Part of acknowledging a problem is understanding the problem. And we need to talk. I think that's really the most important thing. I think in the internet, we've kind of lost the ability to talk outside of our bubbles or silos, call them what you want. And I think we have to relearn this. At the end of the day, what this all boils down to is that we have to put people first. We have to put our users first. Security people have always been doing this. Maybe they don't spell it out like this, but that's what our job is. It's to protect our people, to protect the users. And I think we as a society have to put internet users first, before profit, before nation-state interests. The internet is there for people to use it, for people to benefit it. The internet has great potential of helping people escaping poverty, solving a lot of the global problems. But that can only happen if it's safe and if it's not taken over by criminals. So a lot of food for thought. Many of these thoughts are not ripe yet. They need to be rethought. And I encourage you to kind of reach out and help me discuss this and refine this. But if we talk about ethical data handling, I think we have to talk about all of these things and put them on the table and not just say no. Thanks a lot.